This is Rising Phoenix Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Rhodes. This podcast is for men struggling with an unwanted divorce. I interview experts on divorce, mental health, and I provide insights gained from my own divorce journey. You are not alone. Join me. Joining me today is Professor Sebastian Ocklenburg. Sebastian, let's just jump right into this, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yes, my name is Sebastian Ocklenburg, and I'm a professor for research methods in psychology located in beautiful Hamburg, Germany. And I'm also a psychology blogger for Psychology Today, and I'm covering a lot of topics in my blog that ranges from hugging to left-handedness to relationship to the factors that make people happy or unhappy with their lives. And I'm always happy to talk a little bit about my research and other research that I find fascinating.
Excellent. Well, and that's how I found you, like many folks on this podcast. And you had a blog about whether or not it's better to be single than in a bad relationship. It was the premise essentially. So there was a study that was done that I found very very interesting. Um, can you speak to that? What is it better to be single than in a bad relationship? Is it better? I mean, there was a lot of data in that article or in that research. Is it better to be in a marriage? Is it better, let's kind of break all that stuff down, but let's start with, is it better to be single than in a bad relationship, according to the data?
It depends a little bit on what type of single. So
Ah,
in the data, they differentiated between people who are voluntarily single, so people who are like, yeah, I want to have my freedom, I don't want to enter a committed relationship, and that's the way of life that brings happiness to me, or involuntary single, so people that either were searching for a partner but did not find a partner, or had a partner and went through a divorce that was like not wanted on their end, or people who have lost a partner to accidents, whatever. So there's some people who really do not want to have a partner and are single, and other people who are really want to have a partner and are single. And you got to differentiate those two, because these are very different types of people in terms
yeah.
of personality, in terms of wants and needs in their lives, and things like that. So in that study, um, the researchers, they looked at data from a couple thousand people all across the world. So it's China, Egypt, Greece, the UK, and so on. So it's very international to get like a good database.
Yep.
And what they found was basically that the singlehood itself wasn't so much predictive, but whether or not you're involuntary single. So
Mm.
people that were involuntary single were much unhappier than those that were voluntarily single. But very interestingly, even if somebody was single without wanting to be single, people in a bad relationship were still more unhappy. So the answer to your question actually is a bad relationship makes people more unhappy than to be single. But those that are involuntarily single are more unhappy than those that are voluntarily single.
That opens up a lot of questions, which I'm sure there's, I don't know how much they looked at. I didn't read the study, just your blog. I tried to read the study. I read the abstract, but I couldn't get the full study. Um, it opens up a lot of questions for me. Let's start with, is well, how did they measure happier? How, I know it said, if I remember correctly, quality of life, but what does that mean exactly? How much, uh, where's the details there?
So what they did in principle is they gave people a lot of questionnaires, like psychological questionnaires. And
Mm,
typically, what we might call happiness gets differentiated a little bit, a little bit more depth in these studies. So they looked at different concepts. So on the one hand, there's satisfaction with life, and that's more like an overarching satisfaction with life. So some people are like generally content with their lives. They're like, I'm doing something meaningful here, and I'm generally thinking I'm going to the right direction. But it does not mean that they're like super happy on every single day, right? You can have a satisfied and fulfilled life, but still maybe you have like a difficult job, or you have to make difficult decisions in your life and so on. So that's like the overarching perspective.
Gotcha.
Then they have happiness, which is more like a situational thing. So on that specific day, where you're happy. And that might be something that could be related to like a more long-term happiness. So people are long-term happy may not be happy in the situation, but also like we know that people who are very unhappy could have like, good, sometimes something really nice happens. So you can be not satisfied with your life, but be very happy on a given day. Then what they also measured were positive and negative emotions. That's also quite important because it's not like it's an either or, right? So there are some people who are like they have positive emotions, they feel glad for something, they feel lucky that they're like in a certain place, they feel like positive emotions toward a person, but they can also feel negative emotions at the same time. So there can be like things in your life are very positive, family, the friends, but also negative ones like the job, the relationship, and so on. And for some people, it's quite the way that they have a lot of positive and no negative emotions. That's quite rare.
Mm.
Some have like a lot of positive, some negative, some have a lot of negative and some positive, some have only negatives. And also a lot of people would say they feel like nothing, right? That's also
Mm.
come with depressed people, that they're like, oh, I don't feel negative or positive emotions anymore. So it's always important to also not only go to the happiness, but also look at this relation of
Mm.
positive and negative things.
That makes
Then what
sense.
they also measured is optimism. So some people, when they're like in a bad situation, also you're really unhappy about something, um, they expect things to get worse.
Mm.
So that's also come, for example, with depressed people, that they're like, it's bad, it never gets like better,
Right.
it always get worse. But if you're optimistic, you could handle like a bad situation better, right? So you'd be like, okay, it's bad right now. I'm somewhere like a low point in my life, but I'm trusting myself, I'm trusting my social net, I'm trusting my friends, and I have this feeling, or I trust in something else in life I believe in, and I have this feeling that I will get out of this in better days or ahead of me. And that's obviously very important, right? If you're very optimistic, you tend to be able to handle like emotionally difficult situations better. Then they had a meaning in life, which also is a huge thing. So some people find meaning in something, like this could be a job, that could be like religion, that could be spirituality, that could be family or something. And other people are struggling to find a meaning in life. And that also has a huge impact about our ability how to deal with difficult situations, right? So if you believe in some sort of higher power, meaningful reason to be on this planet, or like a mission in life, something you are like very passionate about, that gives you like a sort of like a reason to get out of bed every day. That's a strong pull to go through bad situations, even if there's a lot of bad situations. And the last thing they also measured for those people in the study that were in a relationship is relationship satisfaction. That's a very important
Mm.
thing, right? So relationships by themselves are nothing good or bad. It's more like how like satisfied you are with them. Like somebody who's really super unsatisfied with their relationship, so they don't have the feeling they get loved, they get appreciated, they get
Right.
the sort of attention they need, or they have a partner that is sort of like doing the things with them they want to do in a relationship and so on. Then a relationship can not be very satisfying, and also there could be like the extreme. It's like a partner is like actively hurting the other person psychologically or even physically, which obviously also results in very low relationship satisfaction. But on the other hand, like people that are really high in relationship satisfaction, so thinking they met their soulmate, they have like the one, the right person to go through life through. They also have a strong factor that tends to lead to a lot of positive emotions, and it's an important factor regarding like general satisfaction with life for some, not all people. It's always like a little bit. Um, you can never say something like these factors are the same for all people, right? This is
Right.
highly
Yeah.
individual. But yeah, so this is the things that they, the researchers in the study, like ask the people using psychological questionnaires to, yeah, be able to grasp different dimensions of what happiness could be for people.
Yeah, well, it sounds thorough, that which is awesome. I think, out of all those factors, I think meaning in life and optimism seem to hold the most weight for me. Um, does that then, and I'm going to ask you something that you might not be able to answer because you can't speak for these people, but does that mean that if these people, um, involuntarily single people can change their outlook on life and find meaning and find optimism, that's then their life quality will improve, and therefore then it's just a mindset situation? Is that fair to say?
I mean, as a psychologist, I would never say just a mindset situation, right? Changing a
Right.
mindset can be like one of the most difficult things in life.
Oh
But of
yeah,
course, I
no,
mean,
yeah,
yeah.
100%, yeah.
So I always impressed if people manage to break their habits and break their beliefs that are hurting them, and find a way to get a more happier future for themselves. It's not a single task, but I think this kind of research and like, listening to your podcast or reading these blogs, or like most people won't read the original papers, but you could also do that. It can help people to reflect a little bit on what is actually the cause of the problem or the cause of unhappiness, right? Because sometimes if you're like in a negative situation, um, you might think that all the negativity or the reason for feeling unhappy or feeling sad is controlled for by the other person. So like somebody is doing something to you, and then one is hurt and one is sad and one is unhappy, and there's a dangerous feeling. That's the feeling of like not being in control, right? So
Yeah.
if you're completely, your happiness depends on somebody else's action, and this other person has a lot of power, and
Hmm.
if that person chooses to do something that leads to unhappiness and will continue to do so, um, we're like not able to change that person, right? But what
Yeah.
people can change, or what they can maybe try to get help with, and I mean that's what we as psychologists do a lot,
Right.
is actually to get a new perspective on things, and like go a little bit deeper, and reflect on whether this is actually something that's only caused by somebody else's behavior, or whether there are things where I can change my own outlook on these things, where I can maybe help myself to be more optimistic about finding a new partner, or finding a way to be happy without a partner, by doing things that are meaningful, that you know have positive impact on other people's lives, where I can just feel that I'm doing something like positive and good. And it's sometimes people tend to get in these loops, right? So they think a lot about
Yeah.
like, this is just what should I have done differently, like in the past,
Right. Right.
so this person wouldn't have left me or whatever. But the
Right.
fact is, the past is the past, right? You can't change it, and
True.
it's always it's good to reflect on it, but it's bad to get stuck in these like sort of negative thought loops, where
Yeah.
you just kind of like consider um, what has happened and go over it again and again and again, without this being something that can actively be changed. That will probably never lead to an increase in happiness to continue to do that.
No.
Um, so
Yeah, you can't
yeah, so this
you can't think your way out of an emotional problem, right? I mean, I think I think that's a lot of times what thought loops end up being, is trying to figure out a way to stop feeling this way, right? If you could just think enough, you'll find the answer. But often that's, I mean, maybe never is that the case. Is that the answer? At least it seems the way for me.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty accurate description.
Yeah.
And yeah, so this is something like if you reflect on that and you see these other factors play also a role, then I think trying to like actively do something, right? To do something where you think this is giving me an optimistic outlook on life. I don't know, like some people go volunteering or
Mm.
so. They're just like trying to make the world a better place, or some others who are just like, need to change the scenery or whatever. But I think the worst thing one could do to fight unhappiness is just to like sit at home and
Hmm.
think about the bad situation
Right.
all the time. And I mean, if this communication about the science helps people to think about
Sure.
like factors they can tweak themselves to get out of like a situation that makes them unhappy, I think that's all I can hope for to to do with the blogging, or like all anybody's talking about psychology somewhere in the
Sure.
media can hope for.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there is a good message here. One is, I think, because as someone who's, I guess, I'm involuntarily single, right? I didn't choose to be divorced, and I didn't choose to. Um, I'm not choosing to be single now. In a way, I think it's a little bit more nuanced because I've had opportunities to not be single, but they haven't met my standards or my wishes or desires or whatever, right? And so I think the message is that but I could have, right? I could have chosen those and be in a bad relationship, and therefore I would be even more unhappy than I am now, which I actually even pretty good. I'm not depressed. I have my bad moments as we all do, right? But I'm okay. I'm good. Um, but I would be worse if I just chose companionship or a relationship just to have one, right? That's not going to make me any happier. So I think that while that may sound negative, I think it's a very positive thing because if you are involuntarily single, um, then being in a bad relationship isn't going to make you any happier. So that to me is positive. And if I am involuntarily single, if I can work on some of these things, finding meaning in life, which yes, that's a very big question and a very big task, or being more optimistic. Again, it's a big, heavy lift if you're in the middle of dealing with rejection or loneliness and all these kinds of things. But if you can change those things, then suddenly your satisfaction in life, your happiness will increase. I mean, I think that's pretty fucking awesome to know that where you are now is possible to be changed, and it's nuanced enough to tell you that find some meaning in life. Again, I know, big question, right? You can't just snap your fucking fingers and be like, oh, I found my meaning. You got to put in a little work. But it's possible, and same with being optimistic. I think that to me is exciting. Um, so I read your that blog, and I read a couple of others, and one of the ones that also struck me was about what touch does to a human, how that affects their satisfaction in life. And it made me think, and this is sort of a might not be a fair question because they're related, but they might not be as related as I think. But it made me think that involuntarily single people aren't looking for anything, or they are looking for something. They're looking for something they're not getting. And based on your blog on touch and your research, do you think that that's a part of a lack of touch is a part of why some of these involuntarily single folks are unhappy? And if so, what can they do about it? How can they use that then to their advantage, if that makes any sense?
Yes, so in general, if I just give like a quick overview, I did a lot of research on touch and especially on hugging in psychology,
Hmm.
because I always thought it's very interesting, because as psychologists, of course, we talk to people, right?
Yes.
Touch is never anything that's a part of therapy, and we were like actively avoiding touching
Right.
patients because they'd be unprofessional.
Right. Right.
But in real life, like in people's own relationships with their like loved ones, with their family, with their partners, with their friends, touch does play a huge role for psychological well-being, right? So imagine somebody being at a funeral, being very sad. Their friends could probably like talk endless, and they will not get them less sad. But what often helps is somebody gives them like a heartfelt hug. It's a very primal sort of communication where you tell people, I'm there for you. And it's also the first communication of emotion that we learn in life. Like if you have a newborn baby, they typically they don't understand language, right? So what does the mother or the father do to calm them down? It's just like cradling them, just touching them a little bit to calm them down. So it's a very ancient system. Um, and in our own research, what we looked into was how psychological well-being and life, happiness in life, are affected by things like whether we get hacked or not, and how often we get hacked, or by how many people we get hacked, and so on and so on. And what we found in a series of study, what I thought was quite interesting and very relevant to your question, was that if we look at people that are in relationships and people that are single, and then we look into the relationship between the frequency of getting hacks and the frequency, the number of people that hack once, you see that in a relationship, the curve is pretty flat. So people that are in a relationship, they don't benefit so much from getting hacked a lot, but single people do. So people that are single and they have a lot of friends hugging them, family members hugging them, maybe children hugging them, whatever. So they get this social touch somewhere uh, outside of a relationship. Um, they seem to have a higher happiness in life than single people that do not get hacked. That's of course always very individual and personal question. So there are some people who do not enjoy being touched at all and might even find
Right.
it aversive. For example, if there's any sort of trauma occurred or whatever. But
Sure.
in general, like in the general population, um, it's true that like people that are single, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, uh, do have a benefit and well-being and happiness if they have people in their lives that hack them. And that's of course might have something to do with the fact that this hugging, the social touch, increases like how oxytocin, the human bonding hormone, gets released. And humans in the end are social animals, right? We shouldn't forget that we're a social primate in the end, and there's a need, not in everyone, as I said, but in many people to belong to some group or to belong to some family, some tribe, whatever. Um, and touch isn't everything about that, right? You can have strong connection with somebody you, I don't know, met on the internet and you never hugged that's for sure. But it is a very primal neurobiological system in ourselves that these release of bonding hormones is something like people do feel a need for. And there was some interesting research during the corona pandemic, not specifically related to corona, more to the lockdowns, that there are some people who really had sort of like a craving for touch, right?
Mm.
Some people have a craving to drink beer or whatever, so they felt an intense urge
Yeah.
to just get a hug or um, something like that from another person. So that is something that I think for some single people might be an intense form of unhappiness. But it got to be said that that's very important message here. I think in order for these bonding hormone to be released, you don't necessarily need to touch by a romantic partner. You don't even necessarily need to be touched by a human. So there's like research that, for example, show like if you have a pet, right? You have a dog and or a cat or so, you pet him, that also could release bonding hormones. There's a very interesting study from Germany actually where they found out that people like self hug. So they cross their hands around themselves and hug their like arms themselves. Even that releases the oxytocin. So I think the message here is if you feel like touch something you're missing, uh, like touched by somebody else, like a friend, family member, is certainly something very similar in the way how your body neurobiologically reacts to. And I think that's also what we found in our research. Somebody is single and is sad about this aspect. Somebody who's in a like friendship with them, give them a hug, that has a strong positive effect. And I mean, it might be weird for people to just ask their friends, "Could you give me a hug?" or something like that. But that could just really be a simple solution to something that can cause a lot of um, unhappiness in a way, and maybe buy a dog. that could also could have it helps surprisingly many people a lot with their mental well-being, actually.
That's interesting. I mean, there's a lot there. So I wrote down chemicals because like that's probably got to release some kind of chemicals, and I always think that's important to note because not chemicals, but I mean why it works, right? And what's happening. I always find that so very fascinating. So the it's oxytocin, right? Is there anything else that's released that chemical wise in the brain that is there? It's obviously wouldn't be cortisol because that's the stress one. Is there other things that are released? And that's question number one. I'm going to hit you with a couple here. And two, if I remember correctly, I read in your blog that massages from random, from a masseuse, not random, from a professional, also helped with this lack of touch. So can you speak to both of those things? Are there other chemicals? Just out of my own curiosity. And then two, does it have to be a person close to you?
Yes, so cortisol actually was quite a good hint there. So what happens a lot is not that the cortisol, the stress hormone, get increased, but we know that it has a complex interaction with the oxytocin and it gets decreased. So the thing that touch often does to people, and everybody could relate to that in their own life, right? So if somebody's sad or stressed, you pat their shoulders, you
Right.
give them a hug, you maybe like some people like stroke the hand of the other person. So there's a lot of like touch things that people are doing with people that are sad, that people might also do with people that are in pain. So and this works because the touch has a calming effect, not only psychologically, but it also leads to a reduction of cortisol. And it hasn't been researched in other stress hormone. I would probably say it also might affect other stress hormones, but for the cortisol, it's shown in several studies that it has a strong effect on reducing this. So this is answer to question one. There might also be a release of endorphins if it's like a particularly happy situation, but that's not like necessarily the case. Like every time somebody gives you like a hug to say hi or goodbye or so, right? So this like happiness things are more like a bit more intense situation. The other question is yes. So it's quite interesting. This cascade of touch is pretty much starting by like the activation of touch receptors in the skin.
Mm.
And for that, you don't necessarily need somebody who's really emotionally close to you or who you like even know at all, right? That could be like a professional masseuse. There's people who do research with like robots or whatever.
Yeah.
What's definitely important is that it needs to be some sort of like consensual touch in an emotionally happy situation, right? So if you look forward to get a medical or sport massage, and you don't need to know the person that gives the massage to have a benefit. But if you like don't look forward to it, you also won't get a benefit, right? So
Mm.
there's a psychological component to it, but it's not like that you necessarily it needs to be something like partner touch in any respect. You could probably just do it like with a paintbrush or whatever. So it's really just about the activation of touch receptors. And typically at has a stronger effect if it's done by another person. You know how you like cannot tickle yourself or something like that because the
Right.
brain is predicting what's happening.
Right.
That's similar here. So in that sense, yeah, you can do it yourself to a certain extent with the self hack, but it's not getting the same like level as some other person doing it in a
Makes
consensual
sense.
positive situation. So yes, if somebody's like involuntarily single and they feel like they would mentally benefit from getting some touch, like going to a spa and booking a nice massage, definitely something that will for real, like on a neurobiological level,
Yeah.
increase um, happiness and things like that. And there's big studies on that it has a lot of positive effects, like these touch interventions. Came one out this year where they showed it could reduce feelings of depression, it could reduce feelings of anxiety, and it could reduce feelings of pain. I mean, these are a strong um, negative things, and touch is helping here. And I mean, that's also some like, you know, in everyday life, this happens so many times, right? You can see it like everywhere. People that are anxious, like you have a kid that's anxious, the mom will give him a hug and say, be brave. You got somebody who's crying, someone will hug them. You got something who's in pain and it's very like not knowing how to handle this. Yes, you can give them like some painkillers, but also just like giving them a hug and telling them, you know, I'm there for you. It will have a positive effect.
Yeah. So it makes me wonder, and again, I don't know if this is fair, but how often? Like, what's the shelf life on a good hug? Like, is that going to get me through a week, a day? I mean, I don't know if there's data on that, but I'm just curious. Like, and is there the different things have a longer shelf life, if that makes any sense? Like a good hug versus a good massage. Is there like, you know what I mean?
It's hard to answer actually because
Yeah.
people differ so much in their needs, right? So my
Yeah.
research, I
True.
think, the person that I like the data point I had in any of my studies had the most hacks on a single day. It was close to 300, but there's also people who get like, you know, one a day or so, and they're also happy with that. I
Yeah.
think what's the like neurobiologically what definitely makes difference is how long the hack or the massage is. So if it's like super short, not much is happening, so it tends to be like for hacks it's around like 10 seconds or so, up to like 29 where you get like the maximum relief. Afterwards it might, some people it might feel a bit awkward, you know, if you ever have hacked somebody for like a minute or so, a lot of people find that weird at some point. So there's some sort of like sweet spot where you're like are not too short and not too long, and that's around 10 to 29 seconds. um, but whether you know you there is some like people who say it's like I think 3 to 7 hacks a day is the optimal thing, but that's more like a theory than anything that's
Yeah.
actually backed up by empirical like hard statistic data.
Yeah.
So I think there's no like study that actually showed that in like a
Yeah.
definite way.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. I mean, because everyone is different, and you alluded to this in our email exchange a little bit. It's like some people touch helps a lot of people, but some people, I think you said maybe even yourself that you don't, you're not. And my oldest daughter is kind of like that. Like touch is not definitely not in her love language. Like she doesn't, that doesn't seem to affect her, or maybe it's a negative effect. I'm not 100% sure, but it would make sense that it's way too nuanced to sort of pin down. It really depends on the person, right? It's going to be what affects them in the most impactful way or whatever.
It's also definitely a cultural thing, right? So if I'm in the US, I would notice people, for example, hack a lot more than in Germany. Germany is more like a culture where you don't touch other people so much,
Right.
and there's also culture where that's even more the case. Like for example, in China or so, there's even a less and shorter hacks because um, there's like huge international studies on that. So that's also a factor. But yeah, in the end, like what people learned about touch during their lives, and also maybe their life phase, right? For example, for children when they're sort of like in a phase where they want to become independent or so, they might enjoy being hugged by their dad less, and maybe like in 10 years or so, they really look forward to it, right? So
Yeah,
it's also not something that's like super fixed for people
true.
across the whole lifetime. Um, but yeah, I think what you always can say, there's like on average, this is a good thing, but you
Right,
always got to look at the individual person. I mean,
right.
that's everything in psychology is like that.
Yeah. Can I? I'm going to ask you a question that definitely isn't fair and definitely is off topic a little bit, but and I don't know if you can speak to this. I'm just curious because you mentioned Germany. I know you're in Germany. Obviously, you have the accent. Do you know what the divorce rates are in Germany? Is it on in line with what is the rest of the world or America, or do you know? I'm just curious.
Oh, I think around 40%, but I'm not
Okay.
an expert on
Yeah,
that. So I
yeah, yeah.
think it's
I was just
pretty much in line with other countries.
yeah, that's a little low. I think 49% is typical of America, so it's a little lower, but pretty much in line. Yeah, I was just curious. When you talk about touch isn't really a thing. I was
Uh,
just thinking. I wonder if that
like
affects.
I can tell you, I looked it up. It's 35%
Oh wow,
this
yeah,
year.
that
35.
that's a lot lower. Is okay, huh?
I
That's
think
another.
one of the main reasons is people like marry a little bit later. We know that the divorce rate, the number one like a factor I think in divorces that can predict whether a marriage get divorced is how young you marry, right? So if you marry at like 18. A lot of people still develop their personality a lot, and we know the brain is around 25 or so, you're pretty much settled with your brain development. And I think generally in Europe, a lot of people marry a lot later than in some parts of the United States. And maybe that's also a factor that contributes to that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Uh, Sebastian, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. What's the best way for someone to reach out if they want to?
I think like on my blog, there's the contact details, like social media and everything. They can just look it up there.
Gotcha. Okay. The last question that I ask everyone, as you know, is what words of wisdom would you impart to a man just beginning his divorce journey?
I think as a psychologist, I always would say it is good to think about what gives you the feeling of being in control of the situation. What we know, what makes people sad or depressed or like really hopeless in the long term is that if you feel you're sort of like in a situations you don't have any control about, you're like, external forces are impacting 100% of your happiness, because that's hard to get out. And what I would suggest is thinking about parts of life, like aspects of life, situations, relationships, where you feel that you have an impact yourself, where you're like in control, not like the divorce situation. Like could be a hobby or whatever. Like just do the vacation you always wanted to do and that the ex-partner didn't want it to do. Something you can control. And try to find that feeling and try to increase that feeling, because this is in the end what like leads to a lot of other things that help to get the negative emotions under control, and maybe in the end go back to positive emotions and go back to a place where you find a partner that's maybe more meant to be than the last partner, or just decide that you're more happy without a partner. And that's also, I think, something, um, if I can get two advices, a lot of people, like from a psychological point of view, don't really realize that you can have a very happy and fulfilled life without a partner, and a lot of people do, and a lot of people do that by choice, and that relationships or marriage doesn't equal happiness. It can lead to tremendous unhappiness, and being single doesn't equal unhappiness. It can also lead to a very happy life. So try to maybe not get too much into one mindset where you glorify the thing you don't have, because it might be even worse than what you have, right? So uh, that's very important too, because then people sometimes they really get into this and then they just think, if I just stayed in a marriage, my life would be awesome. But fact is, it would not, right? If the marriage is so unhappy, or one person goes to a divorce, chances are the other person would also not have been happy long term.
Yeah.
And that's a like trick the mind plays on us, something we don't have, and have the illusion that would make us happy, but it wouldn't be, and it's not good for long-term happiness, right? We should focus on other things.
Yeah,
Right.
amen. Yes, I completely agree. I have this conversation with folks many times that, just because you're in another relationship doesn't mean your life is suddenly better.
No, it's not.
Especially if you didn't learn anything, if you're continuing to make the same mistakes, attract the same type of partner, you're more than likely heading down a track. And I shouldn't say more than likely, but I think statistically that bears out. Like 49 to 50% of marriages end in divorce. Second marriages, it's 67%. So it, being in another marriage, relationship, whatever, doesn't guarantee happiness. The only thing that guarantees happiness, in my view, is your own personal self and how you navigate life and the choices you make and the things that you focus on and the mindset and all those kinds of things, right? Which means that it's all dependent upon you, not just or not somebody else and the relationship that you're in. So thank you, sir, so much for doing this. I really, really appreciate it. I hope that we can do this again sometime. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching and or listening. If you are feeling alone on this journey, please join our Discord server. Becoming a Phoenix is not a solitary act. It is one achieved through community. Our Discord server is just that, a community of men fighting to survive, thrive, and rise from their divorce. Go to risingphoenixpodcast.com/Discord for information on how to join and what is contained in our Discord server. Please join us.